Good afternoon. This is Daniel here with Cops and Cons TV. I just want to welcome everyone into our live show, and this is where we're going to review and investigate and really talk about some of the most interesting cases that happened in the police world from the last week or so. Again, I want to welcome everyone in. Let's see where everybody's watching from today. Looks like we have Red Pill Slave from Nebraska, and Boom News is from Northern Illinois. There's a snowstorm there tonight. We got Sergeant George in California. Excellent. It's good to see everybody in today. And just like we do every week, while I'm going through these stories, if you have any questions or comments, definitely make sure you put it in the chat, because one of our favorite things to do is kind of go back and forth with our viewers. Really interested to see exactly what you think about these cases. And as always, it's definitely possible that you might have more information than I do. All right. Looks like we got a super chat from Valk Knight. Excellent. Thank you so much, Valk Knight. Really appreciate the support on that. If you have a comment, please let us know. We'd love to get it right in there. But thank you so much for the support. Really appreciate that. And the other way that love the content. Thank you so much, Valk Knight. Again, really appreciate the support on that. Thank you again. One of the other ways that you can support us is definitely go ahead and subscribe to our channel. Share the channel as well to friends or family, because we definitely like as many people not just to watch the raw body cam footage that we put out throughout the week from different incidents involving police officers from around the country, but we love having as many people as possible here in these live shows to really get the discussion going. And if there's a case that for some reason maybe we didn't think about, or is a local case but didn't make it to the national level, definitely put it in the chat. It's one of those things where we can definitely get it on the docket for next case. And thank you, Sergeant George, on 400. Yes, we did just reach 400,000 subs on this channel. So again, thank you all for the support on that. Again, my name is Daniel. If you want to go ahead and follow me, I'm over at Police Law News, over at YouTube and TikTok and Substack and all of those places. All right, so the first case that we're going to get into today, this is an officer. Let's see, Valk Knight says first. I wish YouTube fixed notifications. I have to go to my sub box to see who's made video or streaming. Yeah, I'm not sure. I would like them to fix that as well. But I think we're going to put in the chat here in a second maybe some info on that for you. So the first case that we're going to get into today, so this is an officer-involved shooting that happened in Frederick, Maryland. And the reason that we're going to cover this case first is because the body cam footage just came out. I actually just saw it yesterday. So let me set this up, and so you can see exactly what happened, why police officers were involved in an officer-involved shooting in this particular case. So again, this is in Frederick, Maryland. The individual who was involved with police officers, his name is Joseph Sherrill. And essentially the reason police officers were even, interested in Joseph Sherrill at all is because he had a felony warrant outstanding for his arrest for a probation violation. So a lot of times we talk about lawful objective. It's one of my absolute biggest things when it comes to, do police officers have a lawful objective to even contact someone? Essentially, let me ask it another way. What are the police officers trying to do? Is it reasonable? Is it important? Is it lawful? So is there reasonable suspicion, probable cause? That baseline stuff is so important to me when it comes to police and citizen interaction. And it's essentially because when you look at an officer involved shooting, I am always so interested in, how did this start? Is there something the police officers could have done different? Should they have been there in the first place? Well, again, this is a situation where Joseph Sherrill, he wasn't stopped because he had like a tail light out or some other bullshit traffic offense. No, he was on probation and he didn't do something for his probation. So a judge issued a warrant. That's a felony warrant. So he had a felony warrant for his arrest. Police officers had some information, not sure exactly where it was from, but police officers had some information that he was kind of hiding out at his ex-girlfriend's apartment. So as what reasonable police officers would do is, in order to try to take him into custody and execute this warrant, is to go to the ex-girlfriend's apartment. So they do that. They make contact with the ex-girlfriend. And at first, she basically tells them, hey, he's not here. And she doesn't let police officers inside. However, police officers are able to convince her after a couple minutes of conversation that it really is in her best interest to essentially not harbor a felon. So they let her know, hey, he's a felon, he has a warrant, so if you're harboring him or hiding him, that's actually a crime as well. So it's not strange for a police officer to explain to the girlfriend, exactly what kind of charges she could be facing, if she is harboring a wanted felon. So she does let police officers into the apartment. As soon as officers get into the apartment, they do the right thing. They call out out that they are police officers, and they make their intentions known. They say, Joseph Sherrill, we're here. Please come out with your hands free and clear. No one comes out. Police officers, it's a small apartment. It's a 2 or 3 bedroom apartment. After a couple minutes of going through the residence, police officers come to a bedroom, and there's a closet where the door is open. A lot of times people hide. A lot of people are good runners, but they're really bad hiders. This is an example of someone not being a good hider, because there's a closet, but the closet door is wide open, and Mr. Sherrill is kind of crouched down with a knife. As soon as the police officer enters the room and kind of goes around the corner, he sees it, and he tells Mr. Sherrill immediately to drop the knife. And it's at that point that the police officer, he did the right thing in this situation, because he didn't just stand there and pull out his gun and bark commands at Mr. Sherrill. What he did is he did give him commands to drop the knife, but he also backed out of the room. So he backed out of the bedroom and basically into the living room, to where he was essentially giving Mr. Sherrill as much distance and time as he possibly could in order to negotiate with Mr. Sherrill. However, during this, Mr. Sherrill told police officers, "I'm not going back to jail, and you're going to have to shoot me." So police officers obviously are giving him multiple commands to drop the knife. However, he refuses. He doesn't listen. He emerges from the bedroom, and he starts running at police officers with a knife. It was at that point that 2 different police officers fired their weapons at Mr. Sherrill, and he was shot and killed. He sustained fatal injuries. The body cam footage of that just came out today. To me, looking at the body cam footage, it does appear that it's a reasonable and officer-involved shooting that is within the law. I did put up a TikTok video about it earlier today, and a lot of the times, almost no matter how justified an officer-involved shooting is, there's a lot of people who just don't like police, or really have it in their minds that no matter what happens, they're going to say the police did the wrong thing. And, it's got a couple thousand views because I just put it up, and a lot of comments. But so far, I don't even have the normal anti-police activists or normal people who are opposed to police who are given any kind of a problem about this one. Almost everyone is saying they believe this is a justified officer-involved shooting. So let's see what some of the comments here on this one. Let's see. Ivan Ibarra, escalation of force. Not sure what you mean, but why don't you go ahead and explain that a little bit? Let's see. Interactions are a must if you comply with law enforcement. Yeah, so the thing about officer-involved shootings, they are almost always precipitated by 2 different things. The first is that an individual commits a crime, typically a felony crime. Second is when the individual is contacted by police officers, they run, they fight, or they attack police officers. It's essentially, this is basically a math problem. If you have those 2 elements, what's going to come out on the other side is a much higher chance that there is going to be an officer-involved shooting. But the good thing is, if you don't commit a felony and then don't run from or attack police officers, your chances of getting killed by or harmed by a police officer are virtually 0. So it's essentially a really easy thing to avoid if you want to. Let's see. John Kidder is leaving a rude comment, but that's okay. Boom News says she shouldn't have let them in the apartment to start with, no matter what. Yeah, Boom News. That is an interesting comment that she shouldn't have let him in the apartment. And yeah, probably what she should have done is called her attorney and explained what was going on, or the thing to do in the first place. So if you're harboring a felon, okay, not trying to give advice to criminals, but if you're harboring a felon and the felon is in there, right, and police are knocking at your door, the easiest thing to do is just don't answer. Don't answer the door. If they're knocking on your door, they may have an inclination or an inkling that the individual's inside the house, but they don't know for sure. Police aren't psychic. Most likely didn't have an undercover detective, somewhere in the area watching him go inside the apartment for hours and hours. So yeah, so the best thing to do is probably not open up the door. But once you do, and you contact the police officers and you tell them that he's not there, well, then you are pretty much opening up yourself to possible criminal charges. So in the interest of self-preservation, yeah, at that point it might make sense just on a self-preservation level to let the police officers in. But again, probably just don't answer the door in the first place is the most reasonable thing to do. Ivan Ibarra says it's just because they followed protocol. It was their life at the time. Yeah, absolutely, Ivan. Yeah, it was they really did everything that. Really, they didn't do anything wrong. And that's why I kind of walked everybody through this case, why they were there in the first place and how they got there. And I kind of went by step through step, because when people criticize police or have questions about what police did, and people should, no matter what your level of experience or education is when it comes to policing, people should absolutely 100% ask questions about why police did certain things. And I like questions, or I want people to start thinking about these cases, to break these cases down into very specific elements. So let's say you have an issue with, well, I don't like that. I don't like this officer-involved shooting. I don't think it's a good officer-involved shooting. Okay, well, why? Is it the reason for the stop? Okay, once the officer stopped, the individual ran. Do you have an issue with that? And then once you can really just hone in and identify where the problem is, you can then I like people to point to, there was training, policy, or law. There was something in there that would have dictated a reasonable police officer do something different. That's where I think that reasonable conversations are in. That's kind of why I like to walk people a little bit slowly, step by step, through these officer-involved shooting cases. So if there is an issue, we can pinpoint exactly what that issue is. Because the goal in all this is to make it so that there's less officer-involved shootings, that there's less violence between citizens and police. Let's see. Andrew and Tristan Tate. Okay, all right. Let's see. Sergeant George, sometimes you just can't trust TikTok. I think most of the time you can't trust TikTok. However, that's where I have my biggest platform. I think I have 138,000 followers over there. So I make a lot of videos over there. Ivan says there are situations where even if she doesn't let him in, they can go in without a warrant, especially when there is a felon that is armed inside. Absolutely, 100%, Ivan. That is absolutely correct. And like I said, her best option, if her goal is to, one, not get charged with a crime and to not have her boyfriend be taken into custody, she probably just shouldn't have opened the door, right? All right, so that's that officer-involved shooting. Again, his name was Joseph Sherrill in Frederick, Maryland. You can go ahead and watch the body cam. It is all over out there. Here's a case that I want to talk about, and this happened on March 12th of this past year, but I didn't find out about it until St. Patrick's Day, so it's kind of a St. Patrick's themed case. So this is an incident that happened in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, where a police officer, actually a police captain, was pulled over and arrested for drunk driving. Now, I'm going to talk about this case and kind of go through the facts and some of the weird things that are involved in this case. But drunk driving, DUI, DWI, that's something that people have a lot of not just opinions about, but people have all kinds of questions about. So this is one of the few things in law enforcement that I know a lot about when it comes to drunk driving and use of force. That's kind of my wheelhouse. In case law, it's kind of my wheelhouse. So, I mean, you're not going to ever hear me talk about blood splatter or spatter or how to investigate fingerprints or a crime scene or reconstruction of a traffic crash. Not my thing. But DUI and use of force, that's my thing. So if you have any questions on DUI or comments in general, definitely put it in there and I'll try to answer questions as we go through. So again, this happened on March 12th of this past year, and a police sergeant with the Oklahoma City Police Department, he was doing his thing, driving around, and a car in front of him is driving all over the place. He's driving wild, and the driving is so reckless, the speeding, pretty much driving on the wrong side of the road. And the driving is so bad, and here's how you know the driving is bad. It's because the sergeant behind the bad driver didn't even have a chance to run the license plate. So what police officers normally do is they see a car, and if a car commits a violation of traffic code, they want to conduct a traffic stop, most police officers will type in their little computer the license plate of the car, because that tells them a couple things. That says whether or not the vehicle is stolen, whether it's registered, whether it's insured, and a lot of times it'll also say who the registered owner is. It'll say, what the address is, but it gives police officers a lot of information. Also, you can imagine a situation where dispatch would also want to know who the police officer is going to pull over in case there is an officer-involved shooting or the driver flees. That way you have the information on file. I've given you a lot of reasons why police officers run license plates before they initiate a traffic stop. So if a police officer conducts a traffic stop before running the license plate, you know something strange happened. Well, what's happened here that was strange, that the driving was so bad, the police sergeant behind the vehicle was really just trying to catch up to the driver and trying to get the driver off the road, didn't even have time to run the license plate. So the officer does eventually catch up the driver, conduct a traffic stop, and the individual who's driving the car pulls into the driveway of a residence. Essentially, this is weird, and this is always strange for police officers when this happens. As soon as the car stops, an individual steps out of the car, and he's just just kind of standing there staring at the police officer. Now, everybody knows that that's not normal behavior. Now, if it's in the middle of the day or it's an elderly driver and, maybe someone doesn't see the police lights and, every now and then a police officer conducts a traffic stop and someone exits, and usually it's during the day because police lights they're generally harder to see during the day. At night, it's very obvious if there's police lights behind you. But sometimes people just honestly didn't realize they were being pulled over. Well, let me tell you what the reaction is to that. If you were stopped by police but didn't realize it and stopped your car and get out of the car, you get out of your car and turn around and you see a police officer behind you, those people are always shocked, surprised, usually apologetic, because they're not trying to do anything rude or anything strange for the police officer. So when someone steps out of a car in a traffic stop and that isn't their reaction, meaning they just stand there and stare at you, something's wrong. Every police officer knows, okay, something is wrong here. But that's what this guy did. He got out and he just stared at the police officer, and the police officer yelled at him to get back in his car. And the guy, he starts to, you can tell his words are slurred and it's really hard to understand, but he says and he's not really making any sense. And the police officer says, "You're drunk," and tells him to get back inside the car. Guy gets back inside the car. Almost immediately, the individual identifies himself as James French, who is a captain, which is a pretty high rank with the Oklahoma City Police Department. During this contact, he's essentially asking for special treatment multiple times, and this is what's strange about it. So he knows that the officer has a body camera rolling, and 3 different times that I was able to find during this interaction, Captain James French tells the sergeant who stopped him to turn off the body camera. But what he does is he kind of whispers it. He whispers it almost as if the audio from the body camera isn't going to pick that up. It's really strange. He whispers, "Turn off the body camera," and he points to where the body camera is on the police officer's chest. And again, it's just strange because it's like whispering. The thing catches audio. Whispering isn't going to do anything to not catch that on audio on the body camera footage. So I think that maybe goes to his level of intoxication. It's really strange. So the police officer kind of laughs at him and says, "I'm not turning off my body camera." Turns out not only is he a captain with the police department, also the city, the vehicle that the Mr. French is driving is a city-owned vehicle. And the reason why I say that, that was a little bit of a surprise is because had the officer ran the license, it was an undercover vehicle or an unmarked vehicle, so it wasn't a government plate or anything. But had the officer run the license plate, he probably would have found out that the license plate came back to the city of Oklahoma City. But he didn't even run the license plate before he made contact because the driving was so bad. So the police officer gets him out. He runs him through field sobriety tests, and he does terrible on the field sobriety test. He screws up every single test, signs of impairment on every single test. So at the end of it, Captain French asks, "Am I going to be arrested?" Kind of like he's still wanting some special treatment, like he's thinking that he did well on these tests or something, and he could barely even stand up at this point. So he just did awful on these standardized field sobriety tests. So he was arrested. He was charged with DUI. He has resigned from the Oklahoma City Police Department. He was there for well over 20 years. The body cam footage is pretty ridiculous in this case, especially the part where kind of in like a creepy whisper voice, he's asking the police officer to turn off the body camera footage. The sergeant in this case did everything right, did everything correct. He did not treat Captain French any differently, which was the correct thing to do. All right, let's see if we have any questions or comments about this case. Let's see. The irony. I mean, as a police officer, you stop people who are drunk, and yet the police sergeant goes against that. Okay. Sergeant George says, police captain, not police sergeant, my mistake. Yeah, and this is a strange thing for a police captain to do. So I really don't have any sympathy for drunk drivers, especially in major cities, especially when people have the means to call an Uber. It's an unbelievably reckless and selfish thing to do. Let's see. Ivan Ibarro, zero tolerance policy, buddy. Agree. Let's see. Sergeant George says Captain James French had done a massive disservice to his community. I agree. Let's see. Boom News. Let's see. Before body cams, he would have been let go. Boom News. That's an interesting question. So that was before I was in law enforcement, but my guess is that you're correct. My guess is that in the 80s and 90s, before I was involved in law enforcement, I think that that's probably the thing that probably probably likely happened a lot of the time. I don't think that happens. I don't think that happens anymore. I don't really think that happens as much. But your point about body cameras being a real deterrent to that, I agree with you, which is one of the reasons why I absolutely love about body cameras. A professional courtesy is very less likely to happen when it comes to DUI or domestic violence or anything like that when body cameras are rolling. I'm a huge advocate for body cameras. All the studies that I've seen show that approximately 80% of police officers in the United States are equipped with body cameras. That should be 100% of police officers, and it's not the fault of the individual police officer. It's the fault of the politicians who run police agencies who are not getting them body cameras. But yeah, no, boom news. That is a good point. That the body cameras definitely help to hold people accountable. Both police officers on duty and police officers who are off duty may be doing things that are illegal. I'm a huge advocate of body cameras. So let me just talk about DUI for a second. So DUI is one of those things where there are still thousands of people that are killed every year by drunk drivers. And again, it's absolutely just a ridiculous thing. And police officers and MAD have done so much to impact DUI and really get the levels down and make it a socially unaccepted thing. But I've said this multiple times that as law enforcement, and checkpoints, all of that is so important, but I honestly believe that the market, that capitalism, that Uber and Lyft, that rideshare services have done more to stop drunk driving than anything that police officers have done in the last 20 years. So just the availability to have rideshare services, pick people up and to avoid drunk driving. Not everyone takes advantages of those, but they absolutely should. Uber codes are being handed out by government agencies on big holidays. So there's definitely a media push and a government push to get people to use these rideshare services. And it's really when police departments make it easy for rideshare and municipalities and governments make it easy for rideshare services to operate, and the availability of these in major cities is great. Brian W. says we have the Paul Pelosi rule in California. Yeah, Brian. So the thing about the Paul Pelosi case, so he was actually charged. It took a long time to get the body camera footage. But it did take a long time to get the body camera footage, and Cops and Cons, definitely, we do have a few videos of police officers and politicians being arrested for drunk driving, so definitely go through our channel to watch those. Those body camera videos are always incredibly interesting. Brian W., he was kind of charged. Yeah, he was kind of charged. As much as I would like to say that Paul Pelosi got special treatment. He was arrested, and he essentially, and so this isn't a critique of what happened with the Paul Pelosi case. This is just kind of in general, and this is what I always say is that governments and police agencies and courts, they don't really take DUI or DWI that seriously, because first-time offenders, like Paul Pelosi he was a first-time offender. So most of the time, they have to go through what's called, if they plead guilty, they have to go through what's called a first offender program. Most states have something similar. And essentially what that is, they make you sit through Mothers Against Drunk Driving classes. They make you take alcohol tests. A lot of times you have to get one of those interlock devices installed in your car. You have to sit through victim impact panels. Really, they waste your time for about 6 months to a year, and then that's basically, and as long as you don't screw up and you follow all those things, most of the time you're not going to do any other jail time for a first-time DUI offense. So I believe that's what happened with Paul Pelosi, and I think that's pretty normal around the country. So my criticism isn't that Paul Pelosi got special treatment. He got the treatment everybody else does, and I don't think that it is harsh enough. Sergeant George, which is why nowadays you would see this drive sober or get pulled over public service announcements. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, we definitely have those. Any other comments about this case? Let's see. No other comments about this case, but there was really no excuse for this. And Captain James French, I believe he was pulling into his mother's house, is what he told the police officer. Let's see. Let's see. When it comes to the next case that I'm gonna the next case that I'm gonna talk about is, this is really something that happened back in 2020, and a lot of people remember 2020. So 2020, that's when we had the officer involved fatal shootings. Fatal. Linda Branham says any of the first time classes are very important. It's not a waste of time. Linda, okay, so I agree with you. So maybe I didn't state my thoughts as articulately as I would like to. So let me rephrase that, Linda. What I was saying, Linda, is that a lot of people think that a first-time DWI offender, that there should be some jail time attached, because most of these crimes, they do have like a maximum of 364 days in jail or 150 days in jail. So there is jail time that is attached to a first-time drunk driving case in most states. However, most people don't have to spend time in jail. That as long as you go to these classes, which I agree are important. Linda, I'm with you 100%. I'm not saying they're bad. I'm not saying they're not helpful. I think they are. But I guess what I was trying to say is that as long as you follow what you're supposed to do and you listen to the court and you go to the classes, it does take up a lot of time. It is extremely time consuming. But as long as you follow that, you won't do any other jail time in most states. So that's what I was trying to say, Linda. I do think the classes are important. I also think that the classes are effective, meaning that, if you look at all the research that's done, the percentage of people who get one DUI, it's a much lower percentage of this pretty small percentage of the people who get a second DUI after they take those classes. So I do think that they are important. Don't think they're not the classes are a waste of time, but essentially they eat up a lot of time from the offender, and that is in exchange for instead of having to go to jail. All right, so let's talk about 2020. So the reason I want to talk about the riots of 2020 is because two different police departments, I think there's more, but this week, two different police departments just did multi-million-dollar settlements with people who were rioting in the streets in 2020. Let me tell you what happened. So 2020, this was a bad year. Obviously, it was COVID. Linda, thank you so much. I apologize. I didn't articulate that the first time. When it comes to 2020, so this was the year of not just COVID, but also officer-involved shootings. I mean, a lot of controversial ones. We had the Breonna Taylor shooting, we had the George Floyd case, and we had the Jacob Blake shooting, amongst others. But really, we had these, and it was the George Floyd shooting on May 25th of 2020 that really set off a lot of the crime and the riots. And I was on a panel yesterday. On a show called Before the Court on YouTube that's going to be coming out sometime. And I was on a panel yesterday with a retired deputy chief from the Chicago Police Department. And we were asked the question of, what's the worst thing about the George Floyd case? And, of course, the loss of life to the individual, that's the most important. But, when it comes to society and relationships between police and the citizens, what's the worst thing? Like, what's the impact of that case? And, I think the impact of that case is that from 2019 to 2020, that the murder rate in the country went up 30%. Thousands of more people died because the streets got so much more violent. And I know a lot of people say, well, it was because of COVID. It's not because of COVID. So I've looked into the research and dug into the research on this, and it's not because of COVID. If you look at the murder rate of 2019 to 2020, from the beginning of the year through the end of May, the murder rate was exactly the same. It's pretty much on track from 2019 to 2020. The huge jump, the huge spike came after May 25th, after George Floyd was killed by police. So, all of these riots that were supposedly in the name of social justice, the result is that thousands of more people died across the country. So that was the result of a lot of these riots. So just a little bit of some statistics about riots from 2020. So what we've been able to find is that there were approximately 8,700 protests during that summer all around the country. Of those 8,700, there was only a small percentage that actually turned into, riots where there was like vandalism and crime. But that still was about 574 riots around the country. During that, there were 2,000 police officers that were injured. And of the 140 cities that were unlucky enough to host one of these riots, they suffered approximately $2 billion in property crime damage. So I went on Twitter the other day, and so I'm gonna get into the settlements here in a second. So there was settlements. New York Police Department and the Philadelphia Police Department just settled multi-million-dollar lawsuits with individuals who were rioting and protesting during this time. So I went on Twitter the other day and I said something to the effect of, police should not use excessive force or violate civil rights during a riot, but those important concerns must come secondary to literally preventing a city from being burned to the ground by violent maniacs. Stop the mayhem, then worry about being friendly. And that kind of started this thread where people were also chiming in. Someone said firefighters should not worry about water damage when putting out a fire, and you could see what the other examples would be. It's what's frustrating for police officers is that essentially there's a riot that occurs. Politicians who run police departments essentially send and force police officers to go and respond to these riots, knowing that the police officers are outnumbered. And then these very politicians, they backstab police officers because instead of aggressively trying to go after the individuals who were protesting and they were rioting in violent fashion and smashing in windows, instead of advocating for aggressive prosecution, they are meekly settling civil lawsuits with these people. And that is infuriating to a lot of police officers because no cops like riots. There's no police officer who says, you know what I would like to do on my day off? I would like to get all dressed up and have just hundreds and dozens of people just scream and yell at me and throw soda cans at me. That sounds like a great way to spend my Sunday afternoon. No police officer likes going into riots. They are incredibly irritating, annoying, and they are police officers get injured a lot in these cases. I mean, you get bottles of urine thrown at you and rocks. It's a terrible thing. No cop wants to do it, but police officers have to go, and the same politicians who are sending them into these situations where they know that the cops are going to be outnumbered and it's dangerous, then on the back end, they are settling lawsuits with rioters and people who are being violent towards police officers. So I just have a question. So the 2,000 police officers who were injured, not just physically, but also psychologically from being in these violent and dynamic situations, who can they list as a defendant in their personal injury lawsuit? So if you know, definitely go ahead and put it in the chat. Let us know who these police officers can sue for millions of dollars for being in this situation. So politicians send police officers to respond to a riot. They're outnumbered. Politicians then backstab police, and they settle these lawsuits. Essentially, these people come into town, and whenever there's a riot, and they treat it like an Antifa fantasy camp, because these people, a lot of them aren't even from there, just looking for a playground to just riot and to just really just espouse chaos everywhere that they possibly can. So, in specific to these lawsuits, New York Police Department just settled a $6 million lawsuit for 320 people who were rioting and claim that there was excessive force used against them. So each individual is going to get approximately $21,000. The city of Philadelphia just settled a $9.25 million lawsuit for 350 people. And so at least with the New York City lawsuit, that essentially everyone who was involved, every plaintiff who was involved in that case, they're all going to get about $21,000. But the Philadelphia lawsuit, well, they're not going to do that. So the $9.25 million, well, that's essentially going to be divvied up basically based on your victimhood status. And I just want to say that, when it comes to the booking lists of the people who are arrested during these proceeds, there's basically a geographic tour of the United States. So a lot, just like there were protests and riots at Cop City in Atlanta. I think there were 23 people who were arrested. Only like 4 of them were from Atlanta. These crazy people just come in from all out of town because they see an opportunity to riot, and that's what they're going to do. It's absolutely infuriating. All right, let's see what kind of comments we have about this. Sergeant George says that 2000 was a rough year. It was a rough year. Let's see. Any other comments, questions about this? Sounds like Linda's going back and forth with people. Hey, I think everybody has good intentions there, so I didn't mind explaining it a little bit further. Brian W. says officers should sue the cities as well for under-equipping us and throwing us out there with shit rules of engagement. Brian W., I agree. And listen, Brian W., here's what I think is even more infuriating about this. So let's take what's going on in Austin, Texas. Texas. So during these riots, Austin, Texas, hundreds of people, they basically took over this bridge. Okay, and here's the thing. Again, here's the thing. Police officers, there's not independent action. It's not like police officers are on patrol and like, hey, you know what? There's a bunch of assholes who are on this bridge. Let's go fuck them up. Let's go really see what we can do. No, police leaders who are basically told what to do by politicians are saying, hey, the protesters have taken over this bridge. The rioters have taken over this bridge. Go and handle it. And then the police officers have to go. Again, it's not individual police officers deciding that they're bored and they have nothing better to do on a Sunday evening, that they want to just come into work and throw on their riot gear. No, they're told to go there. So they're told to go there. They're outnumbered. And basically, when police officers are attacked, they're given certain weapons by the police departments. And usually what happens is there's a supervisor who authorizes different levels of force when different things happen. So I think there are over 20 police officers in Austin who are being charged right now for using less lethal munitions against a horde of hundreds of people who were taking over a bridge. Again, police officers were told to go there and handle the situation. If the politicians and the government, if they don't want police officers to handle the situation, if they want to let these individuals take over the bridge, listen, I'm good with that. You were elected, run the city however you want. My problem is, and Brian W. probably agrees, my problem is that when you tell police officers to go in there and then expect unrealistic outcomes when you put police officers outnumbered against hordes of violent maniacs. Let's see. Okay, D-Dog and Linda are still going back and forth. Again, I don't think anyone had bad intentions there. I didn't mind explaining it. I think that was my fault there. Anyway, so that's what's going on with these settlements. It's absolutely frustrating. And, when it comes to settlements, and I did talk about this last week, that, the settlements are going in the other direction too. That, there were 12 different businesses and investors in the Seattle area who were directly affected by Chop Chaz, whatever you want to call that horrible place. For 3 weeks, basically these maniacs set up an autonomous zone, a 3-block area, or I think it was an 8-block area for 3 weeks where no one was allowed to go. And obviously people who lived there businesses were essentially held hostage by these maniacs because police officers in the city wasn't dealing with it. So there was a lawsuit that was settled for multi-million dollars as well. I think it was around $500,000 or $600,000 for those businesses as well. So there are some lawsuits going in the direction of what we would consider reasonable. Brian W. Oh yeah, they beanbagged someone. If the beanbag, I remember that correctly. Yes, Brian, they beanbagged someone, and people did sustain injuries. The thing about the beanbags, the beanbag shotguns, and what I remember from the Austin cases is so the beanbags did cause more injury. No one died, but they did cause more injuries in this case than typically you would expect a beanbag shotgun, because it's a less lethal force option. Did cause more injury, and my understanding in reading the story is that the actual munitions, the bean bags themselves, that they were old or defective, or there was something wrong with them. Well, that's not the police officer's fault. The police officers don't come to work with their own bean bags and pass them out in briefing or anything like that. No, they are given this equipment by the Austin Police Department to utilize. If the equipment isn't perfect, it's not the fault of the individual police officer. That certainly isn't criminal from the individual police officer. To me, that sounds like a civil lawsuit that would affect something with the people who are higher up in the city who are in charge of that, not the police officers who are on scene just using the tools they are given by the city. Yeah, so there's going to be more of these lawsuits that are settled. To me, I'm going to be honest. To me, it's pretty infuriating. And again, I don't want police officers to use excessive force. I don't want police officers to violate anyone's civil rights. But I also don't want cities to be burned to the ground by maniacs. I don't want police cars set on fire. I don't want looting. I don't want entire cities. You have good people in communities who have worked for years to just establish a good place to live and to work and to raise kids and families. And you have people coming in who aren't even from the community, who are just for no reason at all, just coming in and destroying that. That is infuriating. And police officers are that line between order and chaos. And when governments and cities give in to these maniacs after the fact and settle these lawsuits, I keep using the word infuriating because that is what it is. Sergeant George says 2020 was definitely a purge season. policies, and it was. Let's see, Brian W. having to use force sucks. Comply, please. Yeah, Brian W. I agree 100%. That's something that I say all the time. No police officer wants to use force, and yes, individuals should just comply with police. What I mean by that is if you have a hammer and you are breaking out windows to a local Wendy's store, and a police officer tells you to stop, I'm saying stop. Now, maybe you think that's a violation of your civil rights, that you have a right to smash in and burn down that Wendy's restaurant because you're mad about that the police did something 1,000 miles away. But I would just say, if a police officer asks you to stop being a maniac, stop being a violent maniac. All right, next case I'm going to talk about, this is a scary case, and the police officers I'm going to talk about here, it's the last two stories I'm going to do, and what I like to do on this channel almost more than anything is to kind of highlight something the police officers did good and police officers did bad. It's kind of like the Ben Shapiro show where he talks about good Trump, bad Trump, So I'm going to talk about a case where the police officers did something, good and competent, and the last case I'm going to go over, it's not a good thing for police officers, and we absolutely have to call out, if we're going to highlight good policing when police officers do good things, then if we're going to be honest about this, which we are, because that's what's important, then we're also going to talk about cases where police officers really fucked up. All right, so let's see. D-Dog, agreed. How do you get people to see the side of the police officer? So D-Dog, you know what? That's a really, the officer's perspective. I mean, D-Dog, that's a really good question. And before I get into these last two cases, I'm going to answer that question. So I think in my small way, what I try to do is I try to have honest conversations with people about controversial issues in policing. That's my main thing. So I started to do social media content probably about a year and a half ago or so. I started on TikTok. That kind of took off. I think I have 138,000 followers. I write articles on Substack that are shared all over the place. And the reason why I like to do that isn't because I'm trying to bridge the gap between citizens and normal people and police officers and try to bridge a gap. So a lot of people who do this kind of content, that's their thing, as they say, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's a great avenue if that's what you want to do. That's not what I'm trying to do. That's not my purpose. My purpose is to really have honest conversations about complex topics and about things that are just hard to talk about. So sometimes a police officer does something good. Let's say it. Let's say a police officer does something bad. Well, let's say that too. And then let's go a little bit deeper. Let's figure out why did that happen? Was it just a bad police officer, or was there some bad training? Is there some weird policies? Is there some strange law? And let's really dig down deep and see exactly why some of these things are happening. Because again, the goal, at least my goal, is I want there to be less violence between police and citizens. That's what I want. So I want to have honest conversations about these things, and hopefully these honest conversations and asking these hard questions, D-Dog, hopefully that'll get to people to be able to see the officer's perspective. And almost more importantly, I want police officers and people in law enforcement to be able to see the perspective on the other side as well. A lot of times I don't have that perspective. So that's why I like to have conversations and debates and discussions with people who I don't agree with. I would much rather have a conversation with someone who I don't agree with, because I want to see, as long as they're honest, if people are coming at me in a dishonest fashion or saying all police are racist, well, you can't have a conversation with those people. But you can have honest conversations with people if the goal and the incentive is to get to the very truth. So that's what I try to do, D-Dog. I think if you see a piece of content, no matter where it is, that you think is honest about what police officers did, whether it's good or bad, share it, especially on social media. Share that content, comment on it, and all the good and honest content that you see out there that shows a police officer's perspective, what I would say is just share it and get it out there as much as you can. Let's see, Sergeant George, moments like this is exactly why, even though I already mentioned it somewhere before, that if police officers should be equipped with body cameras, same can be said for members of the community. Yeah, everybody has a cell phone, so there's essentially everyone has a body camera because everyone has a cell phone. Everything you do is pretty much on tape. Okay, now to get to the case where I think police officers did a good job, and this is a scary case. So this happened in Nashville, Tennessee. So here's what happened. Nashville, Tennessee, in the last couple days, this was an absolutely crazy thing. There was surveillance video of an individual, 45-year-old guy, just kind of hanging out, doing his thing at a laundromat. An individual walks into the laundromat and he's holding like a stick. It looks like a baton. It looks like a baton, kind of a weapon. And what he does with that weapon, without warning, without any kind of a dispute between the two individuals, they're not arguing about like quarters or change machine or using too much laundry detergent. I mean, essentially, this guy walks into the laundromat with this baton, and without warning, he just starts bashing this guy in the head with a baton. Severely injures him for almost no reason. The offender flees the scene. He wasn't taken into custody. That's a pretty scary thing. So what the Nashville, Tennessee Police Department did almost immediately as soon as this happened, because again, it seemed like it's a random attack. Not that it's better if it's targeted, but it's been, this from the Idaho murders. Like if it's a husband and a wife, or if it's a boyfriend and a girlfriend, or if there's some connection between the victim and the offender, that doesn't make it any better for the victim or the victim's family. But at least the community can say, okay, there's probably not a danger to the community. This guy just wanted to kill his wife. This girl just wanted to kill her boyfriend. The community in general probably isn't in danger. The idea of just a violent psychopath running around out there hitting random people in the head, that's pretty scary, because anybody could be a victim. So as soon as this happened, Nashville, Tennessee Police Department did a good job. They got the video. The officers and the detectives who arrived on scene realized, hey, this looks like it's random. This really could be an issue for the entire community. Almost immediately, they put out an alert to the entire city about what happened. And that almost more importantly than the alert is they put out the surveillance camera video. They worked with a private company. They got the surveillance camera video, and the media helped them out, and they got it out to everyone in the Nashville area. Within 8 hours, they had an offender in custody. His name is Kadri Renfro. He is a 32-year-old man named Khadri, Khadree. I don't know how to say that. Kadri Renfro. They got him into custody. Once he was in custody, this actually wasn't the first time this happened in the Nashville area. In the middle of March, so last week or so, there were 2 other random beatings that happened in similar fashion, where individuals were basically just beaten with like a baton for no reason. So they were able to connect him to those 3 different things. So he's actually charged with 3 counts of attempted criminal homicide. And when things like this happen, it's really not just the police who did a good job getting someone into custody pretty quickly, but it's also a partnership with the private company who not only had the idea and just had the surveillance video, but gave it to police officers quick. It's not like they said, hey, we have to check with corporate. We'll get back to you here in the next 48 hours, and you'll hear from our lawyers about the video. No, this business got the police officers the video quick. Police officers then immediately got it to the media, the local media, independent journalists. They got it out quick, and they got, using that information and community tips, they got this guy in custody within 8 hours of the crime occurring, which is a good thing for everyone in the community. So at least after that case at the laundromat, no one else was injured as far as we know, and they were able to connect this individual to 2 other similar crimes. Again, he's charged with 3 different attempted criminal homicides. Let's see. D-Dog, really good. Thank you so much, D-Dog. Sergeant George, this is as terrifying as a Zodiac killer, if not more. So no, it absolutely is. These random crimes, it's absolutely terrifying. Let's see. Linda Brandon says, awesome work, nice work, PD. Yeah, that is good work by the police department. Also good work it's also great to have, it's things like this. Again, it's the partnerships. And this is why when I talk about community policing, which I do sometimes, the community policing, what's important is the relationships that the police department can have with private business and with the media. So the media should ask police departments tough questions. There should be kind of an adversarial relationship a lot of the times, because it is the job of the journalist to really get to the truth of what happened. And sometimes that makes police departments uncomfortable, and that's fine. They should be, especially if something controversial happened. But when it comes down to it, when someone is in need, when the police officers need to arrest someone, being able to have that relationship with the local journalist, to put everything else aside and to just get this out in front and center, that it's an unbelievable partnership, and that's important for communities to have. Let's see. D-Dog, I was surprised to learn that Nashville is actually kind of a slum. Yeah, Nashville, Tennessee. Tennessee is a pretty violent state. I think Memphis is higher. But yeah, Nashville, Nash Vegas is definitely a violent city. Okay, so the last case that I'm going to talk about, and this is an update from a case that I mentioned I want to say 2 weeks ago. And Brian W. says, truth in journalism, what is that? Well, there is no truth in journalism, but when they get out important surveillance video to help police officers out, I appreciate it. But yeah, besides Cops and Cons TV, there isn't a whole lot of truth in journalism at all. All right, so this last case that I'm going to talk about, and this is not good for a police officer, so that makes it even more important that we have to talk about. I mentioned this case a couple weeks ago, and at the time that I mentioned it, it was the DA. And let me get to the case in a minute, but at the time, the DA said that they actually weren't going to release any surveillance camera video video about this case until after trial. I like surveillance camera, body camera footage to essentially get out to the public as quickly as possible so we all know what happened. Again, body camera surveillance video, it's not perfect. It doesn't show what the police officer's eyes saw, but it gives us a sense of what happened. So this is the case of Irvo Otenio in Virginia. This happened on March 6th. So I think you remember this is the individual who he had mental health issues, a long criminal history, but believe he was schizophrenic, off his meds. The family just has gone in the media, said that they've tried to do everything they could, but he's an individual who is schizophrenic. He's off his meds, long criminal history. He was there was a burglary that he was involved in. He was arrested by police officers. During the arrest, he assaulted police officers. He was taken to jail. Once in jail, the deputies in the jail, or I'm not sure if it was one of the doctors or the deputies or the jail staff, they essentially determined that after a couple days in jail that he needed more help than the jail was able to give him, which is a good decision. So they wanted to take Mr. Otenio to a mental health psychiatric hospital, which again, that's a good decision. That's where he should be. That's pretty much the last good decision that anyone in law enforcement made in this particular case. So what happened is in order to get him into custody, the jail staff, it took like 11 or so people of the jail staff in order to get him into custody. Now, he's a big guy. He's over 6 feet tall. I think he weighs 270, 280 pounds. So the idea that it's going to take a lot of people in order to get him into custody, to transport him to the psychiatric hospital, like that's reasonable. We know it's going to take a lot of people to do that. That always looks bad. That always looks ugly. But, there really isn't any way around it, especially if someone is uncooperative. And yeah, he was uncooperative. So they finally get him into custody. It looks bad, but it takes a whole bunch of them to get him into custody. That's not where I have the issue with, though, because we know that's going to happen when you're that big and that uncooperative. They get him in the van. They transport him to a psychiatric hospital, which is about 50 miles away. Once they get there, there are 7 deputies with the sheriff's department, and there are 3 different hospital workers who are essentially in the little area where there's an intake room. Now, at this time, Mr. Otenio, he has handcuffs on and he has leg shackles on. Well, he starts to resist, and he starts to resist with the hospital staff and with the police officers. Essentially, he's pushed onto the ground, and for approximately 11 minutes, not all 7 of the deputies, but 5 or so of the deputies there he's on the ground, he's on his stomach, and we all know what happens. The police officers are kind of pushing on his back, on his neck, on his lower back, and after 11 minutes of this, he dies. Asphyxiation was the cause of death. So what happened is that the DA has charged 7 deputies and 3 hospital workers with second-degree murder. They're all going to be charged, and the reason why I'm bringing this case back up today is because, again, initially the district attorney said, well, because this is an ongoing investigation, it's a criminal case, we're going to have jurors, we have 10 people charged, we're not going to release any of the video because it's part of the case. Well, the DA decided that they were going to reverse that. They did release a surveillance camera video, both of what happened at the jail of getting him into custody, which, again, I don't really have an issue with, and then what happened at the hospital, at the psychiatric hospital, where the deputies and the hospital staff were putting pressure on his back while he was face down. Now, this is absolutely unacceptable, and what I'm going to say about this is that when someone is uncooperative and police officers have to use force, that always looks bad, that always looks ugly, even if it's lawful, reasonable, justified, within training, within policy. Even if we can check all those boxes and say the cops couldn't have done anything else, yes, it's ugly, it looks bad, use of force never looks good, but this was literally within the bounds of what a reasonable officer would do. So I get that. That happens. What's not acceptable is keeping an individual on their stomach, no matter how bad they are kicking, they are thrashing, keeping an individual on their stomach, putting pressure on their neck, on their upper back or lower back for an extended period of time. We know that kills people some of the time. So I know that when I went through the police academy in 2005, I don't remember a whole lot from that time because it was pretty stressful, but I remember getting tased, I remember getting maced. What I don't remember is anyone talking about a positional as asphyxiation. I don't remember anyone talking about, not putting pressure on someone's back. I don't remember that. Now, maybe it was part of the training, but I don't remember it. But certainly since then, there have been in-service trainings, and we have gotten all kinds of training about when you have someone like this, even if they're resisting, as soon as you can get them on their side, get them on their side. Get them to sit up. That the position where someone is face down on their stomach, and you put pressure on their back, that is a recipe for disaster. So this is something that in 2023, there is literally no excuse for. I can't remember when the police department I was with, I can't remember when we went through training, but it's certainly been within the last 10 years. We all saw what happened in the George Floyd case. We all saw what happened in the Tony Timpa case. There are other cases out there that are similar to this that, I'm sure that if we Google it, there's going to be 20 of these cases that are there. But those are the two main ones. So we know this happens. How 7 different police officers and 3 medical staff thought that this was okay to keep him in that position for 11 minutes is absolutely crazy to me. And I'm not trying to Monday morning quarterback these police officers. We're putting yourself into what would a reasonable police officer do? What would a reasonable hospital worker do? Again, if he's in the intake room and he's kicking and he's thrashing, let's say you have 2 different options. Either all of us are going to put him on his stomach and put all of our weight, hundreds of pounds on his back for 11 minutes, or you know what? He's in a room, he's by himself. We're all going to leave and let him cool out. And even if he wants to kick and thrash around the room, who gives a shit, right? He's not in a position where he's going to hurt anyone else except himself. If you have an option of those 2 options, police officers, corrections officers out there, please always take the option where you leave the person by themselves in a room, and if they destroy some county property, who gives a shit? This is the last thing that police officers should do. It's absolutely insane. I think it's reasonable that some of them are charged. Now, am I going to say that all of them should be charged? Well, no. Or there's anyone here, correct me if you think I'm incorrect. There's a difference between being the police officer or the deputy or the hospital worker who is literally putting pressure on someone's upper back for 9.5 minutes. There's a difference between that dude and someone else who's in the room but standing off to the side watching it happen. Now, does it mean that the individual who's standing in the room and seeing it happen and not stopping it, does that mean they did nothing wrong? No, they probably did something wrong. But the level of, should they be charged with the same crime, second-degree murder? No. So I think we're going to see that in this case where we're going to be able to say, okay, these 4 or 5 people, yeah, they probably should be charged with second-degree murder, and these 3 or 4 people, yeah, okay, I get where they should have stopped it, but again, it's not the same thing. I have a feeling that's what's going to happen in this case when you look at the video. Please, everyone, go check out the video. But that's what I think happened in this case. But again, it doesn't seem like even the ones who weren't doing it, they weren't really making an effort to stop what was going on. So that is problematic. That's probably criminal. Second-degree murder, not sure about that. But the specific charges, that's really just getting into the weeds and into semantics on this case. I'll be honest that I'm far less concerned with the specific charges against the police officers. I'm far more horrified about what actually happened. All right, so those are the cases that we're going to go on today. Let's see if we have any questions here before we take off. Brian W. says, great stream. Hope to catch the next one. Stay safe, brothers and sisters. Well, thank you so much. Darkstorm, tasers. Don't tasers work on 280-pound people, Darkstorm? That's a great question. Thank you so much for asking. Yes, they do. They should have utilized the taser before they did what they did. D-Dog, how many people tell officers they can't breathe in order to get a second chance to escape? A lot do, D-Dog. That would be the only justification of not moving off of him. Yeah, no, I think that absolutely happens, especially after the George Floyd case where a lot of people say, I can't breathe, even when they can. However, since everything is on video, if someone says they can't breathe, believe them. At least roll them over to their side because this is worst case scenario. And yes, incarceritis is a serious condition that normally affects felons and people who've committed violent sexual assaults. But always, like I said, in case something happens, not only should police officers want to preserve life, but you also don't want to be charged with a crime. So if someone says they can't breathe, believe them, roll them on their side, do what you can as soon as possible. Even if you have to keep them on their stomach for 30 seconds, 45 seconds, a minute, while you're trying to get them into custody, into handcuffs, I get it. There's no justification for 11 minutes, and he was handcuffed and leg shackled the entire time. All right, that's going to be our show today. Thank you so much. I hope everyone has a great weekend. Please go ahead and share the channel, subscribe to our channel, and if you want to go ahead and follow me, you can go do that at Police Law News pretty much everywhere. I hope everybody has a great weekend. Thank you so much.